teachers, I just wanted to jump on here quick and give just a couple of pointers that have been helpful to me teaching online, especially with elementary students. So a few years ago I went all online, and my biggest concern was working with elementary students because I was the kind of teacher that did a lot of games and activities in lesson, and I was concerned how that would transfer over to online teaching. My concern was that now an online lesson would feel kind of dry, a little bit boring, not as engaging for the student. So I just wanted to offer a few tips via video that might be helpful for that. So the biggest thing that helped me was to make as much as I could visual. I kind of went all in. I went all visual. So the biggest thing that I did with the tools I was already using with my students in person is that I magnetized everything. So I got this really large dry erase board that's magnetic, and then I just put magnetic things on flashcards, alphabet cards, staff slates, and these are bingo chips. I use a lot of Music Mind Games things, and so these are bingo chips that I just put magnets on. So now, that being said, I realize not everyone is able or wants to go out and suddenly buy all of these new materials. But if you have anything at home that you can use in this fashion, you know, this is a time of great creativity and great problem solving. So I wanted to throw this idea out because you might have some things you can put together already in your studio that might be helpful in a visual way. And then along with being visual, it's really helpful to be colorful as well. So I always try to bring as much color in as I can because I just think it pops on the screen for students and kind of draws their eye into what you need to see. You know, other things I use for visuals online are things that I would also use in person. So I use finger puppets, I use Japanese erasers, I use the colorful, hold on, these kind of colorful little tabs, sometimes to mark the keys for students. So any other dry erase, I use dry erase boards lots of times to write new vocabulary words so they can see the spelling. All those different ways to communicate in a visual fashion really draws them in. Then a couple other small things. I wrote a few notes down, but not very much. The other thing I think that's really important is just to stay fun and lighthearted, and sometimes that's really tricky in those first couple of lessons. But the students, especially younger students, I think are kind of used to the screen. So if you sort of let them take the lead, sometimes they'll be silly, they'll be fun. You know, it's really crazy. One icebreaker I do, this is very silly, but sometimes in the very first lessons, or sometimes a student will bump something and like the iPad or whatever will jostle or bump, and sometimes I've actually had it fall in lessons. Instead of, you know, being frustrated and like, oh, can't you, you know, how come you let that happen? Or just to be silent, I'm just like, whoa, I'm falling. And I'll make a joke about how I'm so glad I didn't get hurt, even though they knocked me over. So we have fun in those ways when those sort of glitches that are part of online teaching happen. So another thing that comes up in online teaching, sometimes it's hard to hear consonants. So if you think of the letter B and the letter D, M and N, you know, all those, well, I guess we don't use M and N very often, do we? Never mind. B and D, sometimes they're hard to hear the difference, and depending on your connection and the sound quality, there are others that can get mixed up. So I lots of times, if I'm asking for things, certain letters, like find all the E's on the piano, I'll always hold up a card, again, as a visual, just so they can see that. Because it's very frustrating when a student thinks you've said a certain letter and they, you know, play all of something, and then you're like, no, that's not right, and then you realized it was because they thought you said this and you said this, and things like that. It just prevents that confusion. So visual things also, just they help the communication with the screen. So a silly thing that I do, speaking of being fun and silly, which I think is really important, is I will grab a deck of alphabet cards, like if we're doing scale review, pentascale review, chord review, instead of just dryly saying, you know, play me a C chord, play me an E pentascale, play me an F scale, I'll hold up the deck of the cards to the screen and say, okay, we're going to practice pentascales now, pick a card. and they will instinctively reach up to the screen and pretend to pick one. Now, unless they specify a color, I might say, oh, this one, and they'll be like, no, 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 that yellow one. Oh, okay. I'll just pick a card. I'll just pretend I know which one they picked, right? I'll say, oh, you got F. You know, play me all the Fs on the piano, or let me hear an F pentascale. So having them pretend to draw cards keeps things really lighthearted. It makes them smile. It makes them laugh. You know, they think it's funny that I'm doing that, of course, because of course they can't really reach through the screen and pick a card, but it's fun to go through those motions. So that's one thing I actually use quite a lot that students think is really, really funny. And then flashcards, I actually use my dry erase board a lot for note review, because I always have it set up with guide notes, and I use that in a whole lot of ways. If they're having trouble finding notes in their music, I'll immediately, sorry I'm getting sidetracked, but I'll immediately take them to this, and let's say their starting note was A, and they don't know what that note is. I would just immediately turn my camera around. And by the way, my iPad is on a tripod with an attachment. And it's very mobile, which is why I use that instead of my laptop. And I can post the link for those things actually in the comments. But I might do this and say, okay, you know, this is A, and they'll be like, that's a treble G. And if you go up a step, then they can find their way to A. And these alphabet letters are also really helpful above the staff slate for reminding them, you know, going up the staff is going up the alphabet, going down the staff is going down the music alphabet, and so on. So again, it's just more visual. I find with online teaching, if I just talk all the time, they'll listen to a point, but just like any of us, the engagement is minimal if you're just talking. So the visual draws them in and lets them be a little bit more interactive with you. So flashcards. So flashcards, of course, you can just use this regular way, asking the note names. But what I'll do sometimes will be like, hold on a second, let's see. I'm going to pick a really tricky one. And then, you know, I'll sneak the card up like this very slowly. And they think that's funny. And then, you know, we'll do a few more cards in the regular format. And then I might just suddenly go, okay, you ready? Here's the next one. Okay. And I'll just make it go across the screen and make it disappear really quickly. And they, of course, think that's really funny. And eventually, obviously, I'll slow it down and let them tell me the note name. But just doing some fun things like that brings a little bit of humor, a little bit of lightheartedness. And when there's laughter and giggles in the course of a lesson, that always makes things go better, I think. It puts us all at ease and because we're all enjoying ourselves. So as much visual, magnetize as you can, use as much color as you can. And just don't forget to be a little bit silly and laugh a little bit through this process. Even though it might feel a little bit awkward and there might be mistakes, it's okay to laugh at those little mistakes that come up along the way. So I hope that was helpful. Have a great day. Bye.